Well, hello there, Jim. It's nice to see you. It's been a while, as they say in the trade, but I'm delighted to have you as the guest on the Prism Show this week. For those viewers who don't know Jim, he used to be the deputy leader of the Scottish National Party. He was a colleague of mine in the 1980s. He was a very, very talented member of the NEC. He was one of the sharpest brains, I would say, that were in the party at the time. And I was quite distraught personally when Jim left the party in 1990. So much so that I actually drove from Paisley to Perth to try and convince him not to leave. But unfortunately, my efforts were unsuccessful. Jim has continued his fight since that day for independence. He left the SNP. He didn't leave the struggle for Scottish independence. And he's always been a man with interesting views, which he's not been scared to speak forthrightly about. And that's why I'm sure he's going to be a great guest on the show this evening. So, Jim, the floor is yours. We've discussed some of the issues we'll discuss over the course of the programme, but we're starting off with the Constitution, and we're interested to hear what you've got to say about it.
Well, thanks, Iain. We go back a long way, as you said. I am one of those people who joined the SNP in the very early days. I joined in 1955 when I was 15. And I've been active in the independence movement ever since. I'm one of those people that were often dubbed the traditional nationalists. Our aim was to try to get all the people of Scotland, neither the Tories nor the Labour or the left in Scotland were to be isolated, that everybody in Scotland, we had hoped, would be persuaded of the benefits of being independent. And in the last 2 or 3 years, I've looked quite unhappily at the way that the SNP has developed. The fact that independence itself has seemed to come lower down the scale as the years have gone by. I'm totally opposed to the European Union, and I believe that sovereignty rests with the Scottish people. And if we're going to try to get the ideas of independence and what it means to be independent, then the independence movement, not just the SNP or those parties that claim to be in favour of independence, but the independence movement in its widest possible sense has to decide what it thinks independence means and what it thinks sovereignty means. Because at the moment, I don't think many of them have a clue.
Well, I can understand why you think that, Jim, because I share a lot of those concerns myself. But, at the end of the day, the SNP are important because politically, they are the main vehicle as things stand at the moment. And there seems, in my view anyway, to be a lost leadership. I think the problems in the SNP don't come from the ordinary member, the ordinary branch member. I think they come from the very top. And it's that needs addressed.
There's absolutely no doubt about that. I've looked with despair at some of the the statements that have come from the leadership over the years, being opposed to the European Union on the grounds that members of the European Union are not independent, and therefore the concept of independence in Europe is an absolute nonsense. When I hear Nicola making statements that if she'd had a choice, she would have changed the name of the Scottish National Party because she doesn't like the word national. And I'm reminded of Brian Cox, the Dundee actor, whose work I've got a great deal of time for. But when he was on the BBC programme, Any Questions, he thundered that he was not a nationalist, he was an internationalist. And nobody on the panels had the wit to ask him, well, how do you get one without the other? You can't just dispose of nations willy-nilly by calling yourself an internationalist. And the notion that the members of the European Union for somehow will satisfy those two contradictory concepts, that you don't like nations, you want to abolish the whole idea of nationhood, but call yourself an internationalist at the same time. And it's something that people like Mr. Cox and Nicola don't seem to have come to terms with. And that's the main problem, that they're not giving any lead to the membership in the independence movement, whose ideas about independence seem to differ radically from those that are in a position of taking leadership. And unfortunately, the whole concept of being independent, free from the problems associated with, from the problems associated with the union with London, are just going by the board. I still get lots of correspondence from old-time nationalists who have long despaired that they're being given any kind of leadership at all. And it's perfectly evident from the tweets that are coming regularly on social media that there is a great deal of frustration out there from people who were long-standing members of the independence movement and now seem to have lost faith completely.
I think the problem, though, is particular to politics because, my background's in business. I, set up businesses in several different countries. I'm a very far-travelled Scot. And, when I go abroad and go to cities, I can always find expat, if you like, Scots living there who are successful in business. If you look at our export base in Scotland, we export far more per head than they do south of the border. So there is an international element to Scotland in most fields, whether it be culture, whether it be business. But we've become very insular in our politics. And I think, when faced with a menu in the restaurant, a political menu, we've tended to sit with the old home favourites rather than perhaps try something a bit more exotic, a bit more imaginative, where there was some effort involved. Because I think that's the other thing that's wrong with Scottish politics. I think we suffer from lazy politics, where, there's not a lot of thinking is on, Jim. People are quite content to sit and travel along this very set pace with very little ambition and absolutely no vision. And I think that's a big problem.
It bothers me that a lot of the time people don't recognise what's going on in their own area, what's going on under their noses. The area that I became very familiar with in the 1970s, as you know, Iain, was Dundee. And I had spent a lot of time there as a youngster because it was the favourite place for Perth people to go for a day out. Used to run down to Broughty Ferry to the beach down there. It was the nearest beach to us. And it was a city that I took my degree in, and I became very fond of the place because I was the candidate in Dundee West on 3 different occasions. And I watched while industry after industry in Dundee closed down. I've never been a great fan of foreign investment, or the way that foreign investors can come into a country and make use of the labour and the skills and the dedication of the people there. And Dundee has gone from the era of shipbuilding through jute, through the NCR, and as many other foreign investors.
Don't forget the Sunday Post.
Well, that's one of the that's one of the things that has long prevailed in Dundee. I mean, people have an enormous affection for DC Thomson, and boy, did they used to take stick, because they were the archetypal, or said to be the archetypal Tories. But you speak to journalists, and anybody that worked there said they got the best training. But what intrigues me now is that Dundee is coming back, and they're coming back in spite of all the old failures and everything else. And the number of young people that are now getting themselves involved in the new technologies, starting new businesses, and the enthusiasm with which it's being done, it looks as if there's a very good future for Dundee in that aspect. The other thing, of course, is the university itself. It has a tremendous reputation worldwide. I mean, my new partner, who comes from California, has enrolled there to start an LLM, adjunct to her law degree from the America. And it ranks very high in the world. And I was amazed when my 2 grandsons both graduated with masters in computer technology. And I was amazed at the number of Chinese students that were there. So it's not as if we don't have the educational facilities to attract some of the best brains in the world. And we can sustain an international reputation that I don't think half of Scotland even recognises. And
well, I think it's quite widely known that, particularly in the games industry, that Dundee's done very well. And it's good. I'm very encouraged by that, because I'm a big supporter of building these digital industries, because I've seen the impact that had in Estonia, where, it's created many jobs and very successful companies. And it's great because definitely in the digital field, Dundee is definitely leading Scotland. No question about it in that particular area. So, and that is good news, Jim.
Well, it is, because both my grandsons graduated in that area, and one of them is now in Berlin. He has been over there for several years now, and he's very much involved in the gaming industry, but he's an artist as well as a techie.
Yeah.
And that they lose me completely. I'm old school.
Snap.
But it encourages me to think that there are so many people that are taking advantage of those things. And I just don't think that we get the recognition for it.
No, we probably don't. But I think sometimes we're pretty poor at singing our own song and letting it be wider known, And I think, we've got a lot of very good, talented people that are in business of all age groups, from young right through the middle age, and in a lot of very different industries. I mean, one of the beauties of the Scottish economy is it's so diverse. We have some incredibly strong sectors, most notably, again, up your area, Jim, food and drink. It's a huge industry, a huge export earner for Scotland, and, frankly, we don't boast about it as much as we should do. I notice one of the happy moments in your family life must have been recently when your son Jim was elected into the Scottish Parliament. And I know from just looking at his early work, he's doing some tremendous work supporting Scottish farming, and that's a hugely important industry to Scotland, and one that's been badly treated by Westminster over the years. So there's great hopes that we can make some advances there.
Well, there's no doubt that I don't think there's anybody in the SNP knows more about farming, food and drink than Jim. And he had one ambition when he left the school. He took a couple of hires, but the only thing he wanted to do was be a shepherd. And it just so happened that my family were heavily involved in agriculture right from an early age.
Sorry to stop you, Jim, but I'm just having to avoid pointing out there's a hell of a lot of sheep in Scotland at the moment. Carry on.
And they're all on social media. But he worked very closely with my late son, Andrew Fairlie. And he was the
famous
only
chef, by the way, for those that didn't pick that up.
The famous chef. And Jim has continued his interest because he's involved in the scholarship that Andrew set up before he died. It was set up in his name. I mean, we'd known for some time that Andrew was dying because the brain tumor that eventually killed him had got to the stage where the Beeching Institute could no longer do anything for him. But the restaurant has carried on. It's managed to maintain its reputation, and they've managed to retain the 2 Michelin stars. And it's still the only 2 Michelin star restaurant in Scotland. So Jim's very much involved in that sort of thing. And I don't think there's anybody in the SNP has got a fraction of the knowledge that he does of the 2 industries and how they marry together and just how important they are.
Absolutely key. And, I'm expecting great things. I'm not particularly popular with the SNP at the moment, and they're not my favourites either. But I wish them every success in trying to support our food and drink industry and our farming, agriculture and fishing industries, because they're absolutely key to the future of Scotland. And, having someone that knows what they're doing, that in itself, quite often in a lot of departments, pretty novel idea. So I think it's something to be encouraged, and we should all support it when it happens, whether it's by accident or design. Very happy that's happening. Now, sorry, Jim, on you go.
No, all I was going to say is that my quarrel with the SNP is the total obsession with the EU. I cannot understand why they have taken the view they have. And I get a lot of pleasure at noising them up on social media.
I've noticed. I think though, Jim, to a certain extent, at least in the immediate future, I think the argument about the EU is dead and buried, because we're not in the EU any longer. There's no prospect of being able to quickly rejoin it, and the debate now is probably, do we go down an EFTA route if we can win independence? And that's probably where we are at the present time.
I don't think the argument about the EU is finished, Iain, because the parties who claim to be in favour of independence, mainly the SNP and the Greens, are solidly in favour of the EU. And I have asked, I don't know how many times, from Nicola Sturgeon right down to ordinary SNP members, if they can explain to me how the 19 members of the Euro can possibly be independent, as they claim they are, how they can possibly be independent if they have absolutely no control of their economy. And I can't get past the wall of silence. But I'm not blind to the fact that every single statement that comes out of leading members of the SNP is all about how we are going to go back into the EU, how Scotland was taken out of the EU against its will, and how We must get back in. And I don't think the argument is ended. It's perfectly obvious that in our current situation, Scotland wouldn't be in a position to join the EU. We wouldn't satisfy the conditions of entry. But what bothers me is that so many people think it's the only option that is open to us. And I don't think the debate is anywhere near finished. As far as EFTA is concerned, if we're talking about EFTA on its own, that's one thing. If we're talking about EFTA with the European Economic Area, that's something else. And that is still a grey area, because those who are in favour of EFTA are talking about the EEA as a possible adjunct. And if you talk about the EEA, then you're talking about the EU. Switzerland has just broken off several years of negotiation with the European Union, because the European Union wants control. They don't want bilateral agreements, and so many of Switzerland's agreements are on a bilateral basis. And they've broken off negotiations with them. There are strains within the EU itself, and I think this particular thing has got a long way to go yet, to be honest.
Well, I don't see it being on the Scottish political agenda for a very long time. Firstly, because sadly, I don't think independence is in the short term at the present time, certainly under the existing leadership. So, for that debate even to start, we would have had to achieve independence first. And I don't see that happening under the current leadership. I think we need a completely different strategy. I think we probably need different leaders, because I think the current leadership are quite content. I think they lack courage. I think they lack direction. And above all, they have no strategic ability at all. Let me just give you an example. Published today, 6 out of 10 of the worst affected areas for COVID in the whole of Europe, 6 out of the 10 health board areas are in Scotland. The reason for that, because we're not independent, we've not got control over our borders, we haven't got any of the powers that these other countries had to take measures to cure the problem. Back in July, we'd almost got rid of COVID. And then there was calls then to close the border, maintain that happy situation. Nicola didn't do it. She didn't even copy the minor measures that Wales were able to enforce for a short period to stop the worst happening there. And we ended up back in square one again, with rampaging through the country as it is now. I mean, we were all going daft with Boris Johnson when he was talking about herd immunity. What you're now seeing today is him introducing herd immunity next month for all those under 45 that haven't been inoculated. And that's the plan, because to him the economy is number one. But that's another matter. That was me just going off in one of my spasmodic attacks and, what I think is badly wrong in this country at the time.
I agree with you. I don't think there is anybody in the leadership of the SNP have got any notion of how to start. They've got a man who has been appointed as the head of the independence unit who doesn't believe in independence. And
that's a problem.
And the thing, the point I keep trying to make with the independence movement in general is that they have to make up their mind what they actually mean by independence and what they mean by sovereignty. Sovereignty in Scotland rests with the people. It's an entirely different concept to the sovereignty that governs the English. In England, sovereignty rests with the Crown in Parliament. That has never been the case in Scotland. When the Treaty of Arbroath was signed in 1320, it created a philosophy that has been adopted right across the world. And there's no better example than the American Declaration of Independence, where the sovereignty rests with the people. Now, that situation has never changed in Scotland. And what depresses me even more is the way that Scottish Unionists, they go out of their way to belittle any notion of Scotland being independent. We're too small, we'd never be able to afford it. We would be bankrupt within years. They offer a series of assertions. They never offer arguments. They offer a series of assertions. Now, I have absolutely no quarrel with people who believe that Britain is the country that they want to be a part of, if that's what they firmly believe. What irks me is the almost loathing of their own country by so many unionists who can't think of any argument other than to say we would never be able to afford it. If it wasn't for English subsidies, we would be bankrupt. And if ever we got independence, we wouldn't be able to do anything with it because we're too stupid.
Well, it's a very irritating argument. It's one that they pursue at every opportunity. They belittle their own country. I don't know, what self-respect. Why are they living here if they feel that way? Is a rather obvious question. But anyway, we can't talk about the Constitution all night, Jim. We've got to make this programme interesting and varied. So we're now going to move on to your second topic. And again, I was delighted when you suggested that we should discuss this because it's often swept under the carpet and it's often ignored, but it's a scourge on Scotland. And that's the problem we have in Scotland with sectarianism. Now, I was brought up in the town of Clydebank, which was pretty much a 50-50 town in terms of religion. Most of my friends, funnily enough, were actually Roman Catholics. I myself am the son of a Church of Scotland minister, but I am married to a Roman Catholic, and our wedding when we were married was conducted by my father and by a priest. And, I think that's the first point I want to make. The people that are most guilty of sectarianism are not religious. It's not the folk that go to church that cause this problem. It's folk that use it as an excuse to divide society and to try and impose their will on society. What's your own thoughts, Jim?
Well, I come from a similar background. I come from what used to be termed a mixed marriage. Yep. which is what you have. But I was brought up a Catholic, but my father's people were not Catholics. And I was born in Perth. It's also known as John Knox Town. And the history of Perth is one where Knox preached in the kirk there. And Perth was known for a long time as a very difficult place for Catholics to be. My own family was split because a large number of them came from Glasgow, but they lived in Royston Hill. Now, if you know the old history of Glasgow, Royston Hill was a Catholic ghetto, created quite deliberately by the housing policies of the Glasgow Council. And I have fond memories of running around Royston Hill when I was a youngster. But I also have the memories of the Orange Walk coming down there, and the people in the tenements retreating to the upper areas. They board up the windows on the ground floor, which is a flat which my aunt and uncle and 6 kids occupied in 2 rooms. But they were boarded up when the Orange Walk came, and when the Orange Walk was passing, they would empty their poes on top of it. So, there was all that sort of thing. That was the kind of atmosphere that I ran about in Glasgow, and I knew the area very well. And I have always taken the view that I would never ever go to Parkhead or Ibrox. I've never been to Ibrox. The only reason I'd been to Parkhead was because my son Andrew was a great pal of the Celtic manager, and he was invited to take his team to do the catering for Celtic in one of their anniversaries. So Andrew was very well thought of in Parkhead. And the irony is that Stevie Chalmers was actually married to a relative of mine. So, you know, I had 3 sons who are Celtic daft. I threatened to put them out of the house and all sorts, but it didn't make any difference. They still supported Celtic.
Well, sorry, Jim, when we've been involved in politics in the west of Scotland, I'm well aware of how sectarianism was used as a political tool, largely by the Labour Party, you know, exactly. Particularly during the years of the rise of the SNP. I always remember a great story. I don't know if you knew a SNP activist called Willie Spears, but he tells a great story about canvassing in the tenements of Bridgeton. And for you youngsters out there that maybe have never had to canvass tenements, the way you do it is you go to the top of the stairs and you start with the houses in the top flat and you come down, because that always leaves your exit open. you don't want to get caught up the stairs and the troubles down the stairs. So Willie went up and he started from the top and he came down and he got into the middle landing and he knocked this door. Before he could say a word, this guy came, took one look at the SNP rosette and said, "You orange bees, you're going to do blah, 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 blah." Like, you know, so Willie just put him down as an against, said good night, went across to the other side of the landing, knocked the door again. Before he could say a word, this guy came to the door. "You're all Catholic bees, you know." So Willie said to him, "Hold on, I've had enough of this. Just stand there." And he walked over to the first door, knocked the door, and the guy came to the door and he said, "You two need to talk." and he went down the tenement. You know, which I thought was just brilliant, you know. But I mean, there used to be stories about the SNP getting in the council. They would, you know, stop the money going to the Catholic schools. Or they would steal, your kids would have no pencils and all the rest of it. It was just absolute nonsense. But it was a way to try and stop the advance of the SNP within the Irish Catholic community at the time. And it worked for a long, long time, and then it completely and utterly fell apart, you know, because I think a lot of Catholics suddenly realised, you know, well, we're all in favour of a united Ireland. It's a bit daft believing in that, but we don't want it for our own country here in Scotland. So it was that adoption of Scotland as their country by, I think, the Catholic community that solved that problem. And I'm happy to say, even though it's still a big, big problem and it's still exploited nowadays by the Tory party, who use it in areas where they have no activists. They try to involve the Orange Order to give them some people to deliver their leaflets and the rest of it. You know, and I mean, up your way, in fact, when I think about it, you know, you've got the Tory MP that's been there since the beginning that has never been elected by anybody under the sun, Murdo Fraser. I mean, he never stops talking about the Queen's 11 and, you know, trying to build up the whole religious divide into his politics to give him some supporters.
It's a thing that really annoys me. It upsets me that Scotland could divide itself over religion. But of course, when you look back at the histories, Scotland was the only country in Europe that made Catholicism illegal. And the whole atmosphere between the two major football teams in Scotland just creates a poisonous atmosphere. When my relatives in Glasgow, although they knew that I was active in the SNP, when they heard that I was standing for them, because I had led rent demonstrations in Perth long before I ever became adopted as a candidate for Dundee. And the main opposition to the fact that I was leading rent demonstrations were the Labour Party in the town. But one of my cousins phoned me up and he said, "What in heaven's name are you standing for these people?" I said, "Well, why not? You know, I've been a nationalist all my life." "Aye, but this is different. You know, they'll shut all the Catholic schools." I said, "Where in heaven's name did you hear that?" And he said, "I heard it at Mass on Sunday." I said, "Are you telling me that the priest actually said that?" No, he says, "The Labour Party, they're dishing out leaflets outside the church."
Exactly. And yeah, if only they knew. I mean, I can't mention the names, but, you know, very, very senior figures in the Catholic Church in Scotland in my lifetime have been secretly very strong independent supporters. Very strong independent supporters. He's with Cardinal Gray before him as well, you know. So there was, you know, there was a movement in the Catholic community, which was a great thing for Scotland. And I mean, I think, even though I accept completely that this is still a serious problem, it's nothing to the level of problem it was in the 60s and 70s. It was a huge problem then. Nowadays, it's still a problem, but not in the same way. And there's a much greater understanding between, you know, most communities that, you know, they have no interest in going down that road ever again.
Yeah.
And that's great for Scotland.
Well, the one thing that I always admired about the SNP was the fact that religion was never, ever a problem. Not in mine.
Yeah, I found out tonight you were a Catholic, by the way, Jim. Honestly, I never knew. I had no idea. It was never important.
No, I knew George Thompson for several years. And when George lost his seat in 79, and I was talking to him after it, I said, "What are you going to do, George?" He says, "I'm going to be a priest." And I said to him, "What kind of priest?" He says, "What kind of priest do you think?" I mean, George spoke 7 different languages. Yeah. And he was a very, very clever man. But I had known him for a number of years, and I never knew that he was a Catholic. I didn't know that Rosanna Cunningham was a Catholic, because it was never discussed.
Her big secret was she was an Australian. She wanted to keep that quiet.
I used to say to her, "Why the heavens didn't she ever come back?"
Well, anyway, Jim, we'll have to move on to our final topic, because much as I'm enjoying this, we've got to try and make it the usual length of episode rather than a saga. And I know the last thing we want to talk about is the importance of citizenship in Scotland and people taking pride in this country and our people.
Well, the thing is that there is no such thing as Scottish citizenship, unfortunately. Yeah. And I take the view, and I've said it, and I will wholeheartedly back it up anytime I get the opportunity. As far as the referendum is concerned, it has got absolutely nothing to do with Westminster. If the Scottish people want a referendum, it is up to them.
Exactly.
It's got nothing to do with anybody else. And it's a road that we think we have to seriously think of going down. And we have to face down this whole nonsense of a Section 30 and them taking us to court. It's a ludicrous notion that we are in a union where one part of that union can determine whether or not we can be independent. And it's absolute nonsense. Scotland wasn't abolished as a nation when they signed the Treaty of Union in 1707. And
it's very significant that Winnie Ewing, when she reopened the Scottish Parliament, used the words, "the Scottish Parliament is reconvened."
Exactly.
Which was the clearest signal to everyone that Scotland hadn't been abolished, and all that was happening was our Parliament was reconvening again.
That is why it's important that we recognise that while we may not have any such a thing as a Scottish citizenship just now, it's one of the things that has to be established. at least in the minds of those people who want an independent Scotland, and that they think of themselves as citizens of Scotland, not of the United Kingdom. I hold no brook for being British at all. I've never considered myself British. I am a hard-line, uncompromising Scottish nationalist. I have been all my life, and I will continue to be so as long as I live. And the only way that you can establish that, and the only way you can express that, is by being a citizen in your own country, and that you determine what happens inside your own country. And you determine, because the sovereignty lies with the Scottish people, the kind of country that you want to live in. I may find that if Scotland becomes independent in my lifetime, that the government is elected will not be the kind of government that I would choose. But that's not important. The important thing is that whatever kind of government we choose, it will be ours. And if we don't like it, we can change it. At the present moment, we don't have that power. If we joined the European Union, we wouldn't have it either. So that is the options that face the Scottish people at the moment. And I think if they want to get the kind of country that they aspire to, they have to, first of all, decide that they're going to be independent first, and that they are the only people who can decide that.
Well, Jim, I think that's an appropriate point to bring our discussion to an end. It's been a delight to chat with you again. I can absolutely assure you I won't leave it so long in between to have a chat again. We'll have you back on for sure. I thought your views were very forthright, very interesting. And that's what I promised people in the trailers I put out for this programme. And I'm delighted you lived up to your billing. So thanks very much, Jim. Hope to see you soon. Next time I'm up in Crieff, I will certainly make a point of contacting you. I go occasionally with my family to the hydro. I haven't been for a while. But once this terrible COVID thing's over, I'm sure I'll be back. And we can go to that wonderful Indian restaurant you have in Crieff, Gurkhas, where I was there the last time. It was super meal I got. So that's a day at some point in the future.
Thanks very much, Iain. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Excellent.
Just before we close, we were speaking about Chris McLean 2 nights ago. Yeah. You'll have seen his published photographs of his wedding.
Yeah. You might have noticed that rather nice chap there towards the right in the photographs. That was myself. I was at the wedding.
I know that. I could see that.
Yeah, well, there you go. I thought you might not have recognised me. I had hair at the time. It can be very confusing, but there you go. Yeah. It was nice to see Chris. Very successful. He's doing very well these days. So I see him quite frequently because I'm over in the story. But I'll pass on your best wishes, which I'm sure you got from him.
Well, I sent him my best wishes. And I got a wee response from him. It's a long time since I spoke to Chris.
Well, I mean, he's just added. I mean, you spoke earlier about somebody that spoke 6 languages. I think Chris speaks about 9. I mean, he's the only Scotsman I know that can speak fluent Estonian, absolutely fluent. But he went a big extreme. I mean, having to get married and live in the country, that's pushing it a bit far. I prefer to learn my languages for books.
Well, lovely talking to you, Iain, anyway.
All the best, Jim. Thanks very much indeed.
And the same to you. Thank you.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.